ahead and get started because I think it is noon. So I just wanted to do a quick couple of introductions and kind of some logistics for the meeting today. For everyone in the room and folks online, just a note that this meeting will be recorded and posted on the Kane County Government YouTube page if you're interested in viewing it afterward. And for our folks on Zoom, please be sure to mute yourself during the meeting. And please feel free to write any questions in the chat. We will get to those later on during our Q&A session. So just to kind of give a couple of introductions of who's in the room today. My name is Ivy Klee. I'm Kane County's Resource Management Coordinator in the Department of Environment and Water Resources. We also have Ted Redmond with Pale Blue Dot. He's going to be giving a presentation today. And I would also like to introduce Miss Mavis Bates, and she'll give a couple of quick notes before we get started.
I am Mavis Bates, as we already determined, and I would like to welcome everyone who's here today and thank you for coming. I am the chairman of the Energy and Environmental Committee for the Kane County Board. And so I want to thank the Energy and Environmental Committee for helping us make the decision a few months ago to create a climate action implementation plan. And I want to thank the members of the community, everybody who's sitting here and who didn't make it here today, for inspiring us to create a climate action plan. So welcome. I'm excited to have you here today. And if anybody thinks they would be able to see better by sitting up here, come on down. So I'm going to give it back to, now I'll give it to Mr. Ted Redmond, our consultant from Pale Blue Dot.
Great. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry to have my back to you folks. Not intentional. Okay. Thank you very much for coming here today and allowing me to be here with you. I appreciate it very much.
Speak really close to the microphone.
Okay. Is that better? All right. Awesome. Thank you. So the agenda that I have for today is just kind of a little bit of a highlight overview. We want to share a little bit about sort of a climate 101. Some of this might be, some of you might be well beyond that, but a little bit about climate 101, a little bit about how climate change is impacting us globally and regionally, a little bit about the process that we are taking through the climate action plan process to develop that. A little bit about some of the baseline research that we have done. And then very importantly, we want to get you all opportunities to give us feedback on these preliminary goals. So up around you are preliminary goals that we have for the climate action plan. These are simply intended as starter places. And everybody will get you some Post-it notes and pens, and we'd love your thoughts on it, reactions, ideas you might have, whatever you would like to share. And this will also be available online. Those folks that are in Zoom, or for those in the room that would prefer to do it online, that's available too. So just kind of an overview to the meeting. We've got a lot of information to share, but we're just trying to share bits and pieces and really then get you into the feedback on goals and ideas. So with that, a little bit of introduction for myself just briefly. Again, I am Ted Redmond with Pale Blue Dot. I am an architect and an urban planner, architect registered in Minnesota. I like to say that when I'm not in Minnesota. And my traditional practice, I practiced traditional architecture for many years, but about 10 years ago, my partner Kane and I launched Pale Blue Dot. We are focused entirely on advancing sustainable and climate action throughout communities. We've done climate action plans and similar energy or sustainability plans for about 60 plus communities in about 22, 23 states now. And we are very grateful to be able to be working with Kane County on this process. So a little bit about climate change, kind of a climate 101 high level. Climate change drivers. I always like starting off with this slide because this is an image taken from the International Space Station. It shows the Earth in profile. Our atmosphere is that thin blue line that covers our Earth. From our perspective as humans, our atmosphere seems limitless and massive. But in reality, if you took the Earth and shrunk it down to the size of a basketball, the atmosphere that is really our active atmosphere is about the size of a layer of shellac. So it's very thin what separates us from the void when you think of it on a global scale. Our atmosphere is made up of both greenhouse gases and non-greenhouse gases. Non-greenhouse gases are nitrogen, oxygen, and argon, make up about 99.96% of our atmosphere. The thing about non-greenhouse gases is that they do not react to visible light, nor do they react to infrared light. And so the reason why that's important is that sunlight comes through the atmosphere unhindered, strikes the surface of the earth, and as it hits the earth or any other object, it creates heat, which turns into infrared energy. That infrared energy then bounces back off of those surfaces, the earth's surfaces and others. And because non-greenhouse gases do not react to them, they just pass straight on through unhindered back into space. The difference with greenhouse gases, which by the way are mostly carbon dioxide, also methane, nitrous oxide, and ozone. Water vapor also can function as a greenhouse gas when present, but water vapor really is dependent on all sorts of atmospheric and climate conditions. Think of, Arizona in the middle of the summer versus, the Great Lakes in July, right? There's a lot of different water vapor that's going to happen. But our greenhouse gases make up only 0.04% of our atmosphere. What makes them different is that they also do not react to visible light, but they do react to infrared energy. So that heat energy that bounces off of the earth or other surfaces, as it strikes the greenhouse gas components in our atmosphere, it gets bounced back. Some of that heat energy bounces back to the earth. Now, that's not a bad thing. This effect warms our planet. Without that effect, our Earth would have roughly the same average temperature as the moon. That would be a little bit different because we have some volcanic conditions that the moon does not have. But without that blanket of warmth, we would have an average temperature much closer to the moon, around 0 degrees. But because of the greenhouse gas effect, we've had an average temperature of about 59 degrees over eons. Now, there's evidence of greenhouse gas effect beyond Earth, just within our own solar system. If we look at Mars, which has an extremely thin atmosphere of a little bit of carbon in there, the average temperature on Mars is at -85. Earth is at a comfy 59. Venus, which has a very thick layer of greenhouse gas, has a average temperature pushing 900 degrees. Now, we might say, well, Venus is closer to the sun, but so is Mercury, which is even closer in, and its atmosphere doesn't exist, and its average surface temperature is 330 degrees. That's a good illustration of how greenhouse gases, and the larger the accumulation of it, how it can impact surface temperature on the planets in our solar system. So the largest source of global warming pollution is the burning of fossil fuels. The reason for that is that fossil fuels were taking fossilized carbon, so carbon that's locked in the geologic cycle. We're taking that geologic carbon and we're burning it. That turns into a greenhouse gas emission that goes into our atmosphere. So we're adding to our atmospheric carbon budget through the consumption of fossil fuels. So CO2 is now being released faster than any time in the last 66 million years or so. And our climate is responding to that. Just looking at our average temperatures over the last century and a half. 21 of the 22 hottest years have been in this century, which is quite astounding considering that we're just in 2023. And in fact, the 8 hottest years have been the last 8 years. However, I always like to talk a little bit about why I'm not depressed all the time, because I think that's nice to have. So we're living in, I think, an amazing era of opportunity. One is that public opinion. Americans are experiencing what has been defined as a false social reality. This is from a report that just was issued in Nature Communications in August. What they found was that on average, 66 to 80% of Americans throughout the United States in every sort of geographic region favor climate action policies or programs or politics. Interestingly, the opposite is true, though. If you ask those same folks, what do you think your neighbors or other community members think? Roughly just 37 to 40% think that their community holds the same opinion. So what that means is that in Illinois, for instance, if you ask the average person sort of, what do you think about climate impacts and would you like to see something done? And what do you think your community members think? They'll tend to estimate about 26% below what reality is likely to be based on this study. We're also living in a great era of opportunity to build on success. The US emissions peaked in 2007, and they've been continuing to decline ever since. Now that pace of decline is not quite what we need it to be. It's a little slower than what we ideally need it to be, but it is a good opportunity for us to build on that. IPCC, which is the International Panel on Climate Change, the UN body that helps aggregate science, indicates that they believe that cities and counties, with their ability to focus on policies and actions for concentrations of people, alone can achieve about 40% of the reductions necessary for us to avoid the worst potentials of global warming, which means that it's in our hands as local communities to really make an effective change. Building on that success also opens up opportunities for economic development, job creation, and improved quality of life. According to the World Resources Institute, there's about $24 trillion in benefits available to local communities over the next few decades. So the project that we're here to talk about is to create a climate action plan, implementation plan for Kane County. The intent for that plan is to help guide both county operations as well as guiding community-wide actions towards addressing climate action. The planning process is going to create goals, which the preliminary, just starter potential goals are the ones that are up on the wall. As those get refined, we are going to be creating then strategies and detailed actions to achieve those goals. The climate action plan, just to sort of define it, it's not dissimilar to a comprehensive plan. It's a roadmap to guide action. For Kane County, that roadmap is going to focus on both mitigation and adaptation. When we're talking about climate action, mitigation is reducing our emissions, our greenhouse gas contributions, and adaptation is saying, what can we do to increase our resilience in the face of the changes that we can anticipate in the coming decades? Climate action plans tend to focus very broadly across the community on multiple sectors, as we call them. So sort of all aspects of life that we tend to plan around, just like a comprehensive plan. So the mitigation sectors tend to focus on buildings and energy, land use and transportation, and solid waste and recycling. Those, again, are sort of heavy hitter for emissions reductions opportunities. There's also adaptation potential in those sectors. The adaptation strong sectors then are water, wastewater, flooding considerations, climate health and safety, food and local agriculture, green space, ecosystems, trees, and then climate economy. And by climate economy, what we're talking about is, hey, if we're looking at strategies to change some things, there's economic potential in that. Why not harvest that economic potential for our communities as opposed to allowing other communities to take that economic potential? So the process that we are going through, we've started off first with doing a lot of foundational research that's as Kane County specific as we can make it based on data sets and information available. We've got 4 primary research documents. These are all available online on that link there at the bottom, paleblue.llc Kane-climate action. The 4 documents are a vulnerability assessment, greenhouse gas emissions assessment and forecast, ground cover assessment, and a renewable energy potential study. Now, all of those documents, which are some, 300 pages worth of content, get summarized down into a baseline study that tries to provide a little bit of summary for each of those sectors that I talked about. In addition to that, that baseline summary then has preliminary starter goals, the ones that are on the wall and will be available to the Zoom members online. And so the purpose of these documents is to simply provide a starting place for a planning process so that we can work collaboratively with kind of a shared set of information to help us then explore how might we refine and finalize goals and actions. So in other words, the goals that you see up is just a place to start, and that's why we want input from folks here. What we're going to be doing next, starting next month, is working with a collaborative planning team. That planning team is, we're looking to comprise it of, staff from the county, from municipalities, volunteers and representatives from the community. And that process, we're going to go through a very collaborative sort of workshop session. We have some tools to help facilitate that, where we are going to co-author identification of strategies and actions to meet the goals, and also refining the goals from that input. So we're trying to get a lot of deep community input through a collaborative team process. For community engagement, we're doing community-wide meetings like this. We also have an online survey that's available. The online survey is broad, looking for ideas, thoughts, concerns, etc. The community meetings also are intended to be broad, but then also provide an opportunity to give input on these potential goals. Once we have a draft plan, we're going to go through that same sort of process again to share the draft plan and get input and reactions to the draft plan, ideas on how it can be refined, etc. And we'll also have an online review and feedback mechanism, also surveys online that people can take. Our schedule has us aiming at having a final plan by the end of the year. And again, as I say, collaborative team engagement starting next month through about October or so. So I'll just kind of pause. I've got a little bit more to share, but I'll just pause and see if there's any questions at all that anybody has. Because otherwise I tend to just keep talking. Oh, yeah. How much money was outlaid for the initial plan? I gave the question. Okay. She was asking how much money was outlaid for the initial plan. And
The budget for the climate action plan to work with Pale Blue Dot was $75,000.
Other questions?
does that work? Or you have to turn it on? Okay, thank you. With any other? And there'll be more time for questions later, so I don't want to rush you. Okay. Great, thank you very much. Okay, so what I want to do now is just share a little bit of what's in those documents so that you don't have to go read them to get some highlight, but this is just a highlight. Okay, so there's more information in there. So first, the vulnerability assessment. This is a fun graphic. Many of you have probably seen these now. It's put together by a group called Climate Stripes. This represents the average temperatures for the state of Illinois since, on that side is 1895, on this side is 2021. And what it shows is if it's a blue stripe, it's colder than average temperature. If it's a red stripe, it's hotter than average temperature. The nuance here is that when we talk about climate, average is actually measured against a 30-year window. So what that tells you is that if it's hotter than average on the right side of the screen, it's even hotter when you compare it to the far left side of the screen, because all those are being compared against 30-year averages. Yes. Is this an algorithm? Yeah, those are actual temperatures. Well, this document, this right here is from a group called Climate Stripes. And I'm not sure where, I believe that they pull it from NOAA records.
Doesn't go back climate. Traffic doesn't go back like you're going. So what has to occur is they have to build an algorithm, and some programmer has to program potentially going back, which what they've been changing is the fact that when they go back, they figure out that I'm wrong, so then they have to reprogram it to make themselves right. And that's the concern.
Actually, these are actual measured temperatures, 1895 through 2021. Sure, you bet. If you can give us your contact info, I can get it. Okay. Yes.
We're being asked to repeat the questions.
Oh.
So that most recent question were the temperatures based on an algorithm or actual temperatures? And your response was?
Yes, that these here represented, again, this comes from another group, but these are coming from recorded data, not modeled. Sure. Yes. Oh, okay. I'll turn one off. Work. Okay. Alrighty. So as we look into the future, now these are projections assuming that we do not reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. By the end of the century, we can anticipate that Kane County could have an average temperature that's roughly 9 to 12 degrees warmer than it is today. We can anticipate an increase in heavy precipitation of about 30%. We can anticipate an increase in days above 95 of about another 55 days a year that are above 95 degrees. So what I often like to do is I like to think of that in terms of our map. What does that experience feel like? And right now, we can see we're the little star up at the top. By the end of the century, if we do not reduce our emissions globally and locally, we can anticipate summers might feel an awful lot like Alabama. So that's the equivalent of picking up the county and moving it 10 miles south every year through the end of the century. Now, that's not, if we can reduce emissions, we can curb that change. So this is just illustrating if emissions are not modified. So of course, there are climate risks that come about from those changes. The primary climate risks are the blue dots on the one side. So it's things like extreme temperature and weather, flooding, impacts on air quality, vector-borne diseases, think ticks and mosquitoes and things like that, that as we extend our summers, that extends us as well. Food insecurity concerns, water quality, waterborne illness, and power or infrastructure impacts. There's also economic risks. Some of them include crop yield impacts, mortality, energy cost, property crime, or even violent crime has been linked with particularly extreme weather events. There are other economic impacts, but there's just not good modeling, so I don't usually include them. Now, those impacts, all of us have the potential of being impacted by those things. When it comes to climate adaptation planning, though, what we want to do is we want to focus on the community members that might be especially vulnerable. If we can help make sure that those that might be particularly sensitive to these impacts, if we can help that be less sensitive, we're basically helping everyone. So we tend to look at how do these things impact our populations that might be particularly vulnerable. So in Kane County, the risks that are probably something that we may want to prioritize would be extreme weather and temperature, flood, air quality, food insecurity, and power or infrastructure impacts. The economic risks that we may want to be particularly thoughtful of are impacts to crop yield and also potentially energy costs, although that's not necessarily highlighted on that screen. The groups that may be particularly vulnerable that we may have prioritization for in the county, just based on raw populations, would be older adults, those in economic stress, and people of color. So as I indicated, there are economic impacts. Just these 5 economic impacts, which have been modeled. As we look into the future, by the end of the century, those could equal about $400 million worth of annual impacts for Kane County, again, assuming that emissions are not curbed. So for the greenhouse gas inventory and forecast, That report in it has an introduction, a little bit more about what the function of greenhouse gas emissions. It has a summary looking from about from 2010 through 2019 of our countywide emissions. We also like to visualize it. So that happens to be a cube equal to our annual emissions. I think it's seen from about 2.5 miles away. Summarizing the emissions trends in each sector. The report also talks a little bit about per capita comparisons. So it's really difficult to compare communities to other communities. But what we'll often do is reduce it down to a per capita. And then that way we can kind of compare against other communities just to see how do we fare. We've also included a greenhouse gas emission forecast into the future. So the findings in the report illustrate, oops, I'm sorry. The findings illustrate roughly 34% is electricity consumption, 28% is natural gas or other heating fuels, 31% is transportation, about 3% in solid waste emissions, and about 2.5% related to agriculture. Looking at total emissions, in 2010, we were at about 7.37 million metric tons of emissions. By 2019, that did fall a bit. We're down to just a little over 7 million metric tons, and that's countywide. Looking at the sort of trend lines, we have a couple emission sectors that have trended downward and a couple emission sectors that have trended upward. And you can see based on the red X's are those that have trended upward versus the green checks, which have trended downward. So the downward trending sections are solid waste and electricity emissions. Those have both been declining. Those that have trended upward to some degree at least are agriculture, transportation, and natural gas. I will point out agriculture is actually trended upward for the first part of that time frame, but has been trending downward since about 2015. So, I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Why is natural gas going up is a great question. So I can't tell you everything about that because we don't have a high quality breakdown of who exactly in the different communities are consuming natural gas. My recollection, and this number, by the way, comes from CMAP, which is the Chicago Metro Area Planning Agency. And my recollection, it's a little fuzzy because we did this a couple months ago. My recollection was their data was showing, I believe industry emissions had been going up a bit. Residential, I think, may have gone up also, but commercial had been going down. Now, so what's going on in there in terms of like the commercial or industrial? I can't answer that right now. I'm sorry.
Madam Chair.
Thank you. Can you go back to the previous chart, please? With electricity, with the increase in electric cars, electricity is supposed to be a sustainable fuel source for us. Is that trend line going to be going up?
So that's a great question. So what we will typically see, and I think this is the instance actually in Kane County when we look backwards, is that as things become electrified, we will see increases in electric consumption, but the emissions associated with the electricity has as much to do with where we're getting our electricity from. So as our grid moves away from coal or natural gas fueled electricity and moves more towards renewables like hydro or solar or wind, et cetera, the emissions associated with electric consumption goes down. So what we anticipate is, and Illinois has some pretty robust goals towards cleaning the grid. So as the grid becomes cleaner with more renewables in it, even as electric consumption goes up, our emissions should track downward.
And will that include the use of nuclear energy? Oh, increased use of nuclear energy to sustain that? Because I'm not really knowledgeable on this as far as the data goes, but would there be enough, let's just say in Kane County or in Illinois, simply to supply the needs with renewables, solar, wind, hydro?
Yeah, there's sufficient resources in terms of solar, wind, and hydro. We don't know the numbers for hydro, but between solar and wind, there should be sufficient resources within the county. However, we're also, the grid is interconnected, so we can pull that electricity from surrounding counties, from surrounding states. And certainly between those two, there is definitely enough. As far as nuclear, nuclear would be a zero emission fuel source. There are a fair bit of emissions associated with the production of the nuclear fuel and the nuclear power plants. So it has a life cycle emissions factor that when we think of it kind of across the board, we would tend to want to think of that also.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry.
Do you want to bring the mic over to her, Ted? Or there's an extra mic too.
Are there any statistics?
Turn it on.
Oh, all the way here? Can you hear me? Okay. This is regarding solar energy. What statistics exist as to how much land you need to appropriate in order to get the kind of solar output that you would like to get for, to replace some of the more dense, fuels that exist today?
So I can't necessarily give you an exact number for how many acres, for instance, we would need for Kane County. But I can say that in our renewable energy potential study, what we have done is we've looked at what could happen on rooftops, what could happen on ground mount, or what is known as my brain just evaporated. Basically, solar arrays on top of parking areas. And in our calculations, what we did was we put an assumption in there in terms of how much might you want. And we just targeted a small number, like 1%. So a smaller number. And we did that because we're assuming you don't want to carpet every green space with solar.
That's precisely where I'm going with this, because in order to produce as much energy as we're getting out of a small gas-powered plant, you have to create a very large solar field, correct?
There's a size related to that, absolutely. However, we don't necessarily, we're not saying that Kane County has to produce all of its electricity in local solar or wind, just as you're currently not producing your own electricity from natural gas from Kane County, right? The natural gas or other energy sources that power Kane County, a lot of them are coming from Alberta or North Dakota or some other locations, right? So very similarly, renewable energy, when it's within the grid, can come from all sorts of locations, right?
We can carpet other locations with the solar cells rather than have them here. Outsource the misery. My other point would be that woman made a very nice point about nuclear. There is now coming up technology, mini nuclear plants, which are saltwater cooled. There's different kind of cooling process. Has that been factored in at all, or even looked at in terms of your plan, or what you've added, what you put in here, the baseline?
Well, no, because we're not. We are indicating a goal. You'll see we have got some suggested goals, and in the energy section we have goals around renewable energy. So certainly if somebody wants to encourage inclusion of nuclear, then that would be a good comment.
One last thing on the solar in particular, there has to be a cost of disposal when the solar cells wear out. Those are toxic metals that are used in the production of solar cells. Is the cost going to be factored into any plan of how much solar would be deployed?
Well, first of all, our plan does not have detailed costs associated with it, but I will say that you're absolutely right, and recycling is a necessary development for renewables. There has been very good studies, though, that have been done that have already identified the life cycle impacts of solar and wind versus natural gas or coal. And although there are considerations to think about related to, what do we do with the materials that are in a solar panel after 30 years of a lifespan? That is an issue that we need to collectively think about. Those impacts already, though, are smaller than the impacts of fossil fuels. So if you're interested, I can dig up some of those studies. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so this just happens to give us per capita relationship of Kane County versus other communities in the region, counties in the region. The upshot is Kane County's not so bad. We're right in the middle in terms of overall emissions and per capita emissions. We also had some questions earlier about, hey, how does Kane County compare to, what if we think about it on a global scale? Well, so globally, the top 10 emitters in terms of absolute emissions. So regardless how many people live in the communities or in the countries, on the left side there are the top 10 emitters from China, United States, India, and downward. If we look at countries on a per capita basis, that's on the right-hand side. So that's on a, based on population size. You'll see the United States now has dropped down to about, we're at number 10. And that's because we have been reducing our emissions. If we were to just compare Kane County, like suddenly we waved the wand and Kane County was its own country, congratulations. Kane County would be roughly 122nd, just between Cyprus and Brunei, which is not a fair comparison, right? I mean, because it's, if we made every county a country, then it'd be a different thing. But we were exploring it. If we look on a per capita basis, though, Kane County would be 13th. And that's just sort of illustrating Kane County again on the world stage on a per capita basis. Kane County's edging out US average, but it shows it in comparison on per capita to some of the other countries. So as I indicated that we did do an emissions forecast. By and large, we have trends that will be reducing emissions per unit. So electricity, for instance, is on a downward trend. Kane County, though, CMAP has projections illustrating Kane County's population increasing. So when we look at absolute numbers, we can anticipate that if those population increases happen, we can anticipate that our emissions will more or less kind of stay flatline without looking to change that dynamic. Those yellow lines are where the science tells us we need to be. The top line is where we need our emissions to be in order to cap global warming to 2 degrees Celsius by the middle of the century. The bottom line is where we need emissions to go in order to cap global emissions at 1.5 degrees Celsius by the middle of the century. Again, we did a ground cover study. This we're just looking to understand at a high level ground conditions and how might that influence or encourage adaptation thoughts, as well as, well, primarily adaptation, really. That report has an introduction on how we did it and why we did it. It's got the statistics for each of those sectors, ground cover, tree canopy, grassland, open water, agriculture land, and then all of those, and we also did land, lawn and prairie grass as well. We have a section that talks about some of the land cover impacts and benefits, particularly around trees, which are very heavy duty in terms of their environmental benefits. And tree canopy economic value. There's calculations that NOAA and EPA have identified, and USDA Forest Service, how to estimate at a high level energy savings related to our trees. And then a findings summary where we also can compare that against sort of census tract by census tract throughout the community against populations. And the point of all of this is to give us a starting point for a potential goal for related to land cover. So potential goals for increasing tree canopy, potential goals for increasing prairie grass or wildflower installations. And again, these are starters, but it helps us create a relationship between a potential goal and how many trees does that relate to in terms of planting per year. So our intent there is just to provide a place to start to goals that we may want to create. This gives a breakdown for ground cover. So our trees are roughly 16, 17%. Grass cover, and this would be lawn grasses are 26%. Agriculture is about 40%. Water is just a little under 2%. Light impervious surfaces, so think concrete pavement or white, light colored roofs that help bounce light off, is about 4%, and dark impervious surfaces, so think asphalt or black rooftops, are about 10%. That gives us a little bit of breakdown for the grasses and a little bit of breakdown for the impervious surfaces that are building versus pavement. The upshot is that dark pavement is the largest sector within our impervious area. So if we think about strategies that we may want to focus on for impervious surfaces, that's a good place for us to start. And as I've indicated, we've also compared that against census tracts. This is way too tiny to read, I understand that, but graphically what I want to point out is that in many communities, we see a relationship between those portions of our community that have higher low-income community members and having less tree cover and having more dark impervious surfaces. Now, the reason why dark impervious surface is important is as we experience extreme heat, impervious surfaces will create a micro heat island. Think about walking across a parking lot when it's a hot July day, what that feels like, right? So we've organized this chart so that the census tracts with higher low-income populations are at the top. Those with lower low-income populations are at the bottom. And interestingly enough, we're not really seeing a pattern related to tree canopy coverage. It's it's pretty much equal down the board. I mean, it goes back and forth, but in general, there's not a specific trend. There is, however, a trend related to impervious surface coverage, particularly dark impervious surface coverage. So it gives us some potential adaptation thoughts. How might we think about that? And so, as I've said, we've come up with a starter point for tree canopy coverage, and that is in the green space, if you want to provide input on that. The renewable energy potential study, so that just quickly reviews renewable energy in the state, kind of trends in the state, trends in the community, in the county. We also look at rooftop solar potential, how much solar energy could be created off of that rooftop solar potential. And then because we understand that we're not going to just because I could put solar on my roof doesn't mean I'm going to. We then illustrate a couple adoption scenarios, what the market might support based on past trends and future projections statewide. Then we also look at estimating how much solar we might be able to get on a portion of our ground or a portion of our parking area, just to illustrate what a reasonable potential goal might be for on-site renewable, which, by the way, that number is about 9–10%. It could go higher, right? It just means that we would change some of those scenarios. So we want more than 1% of our ground covered by solar. That number could go up or down. We also looked at a waste to energy, which is plasma gasification. It's a zero emission waste to energy. And that strategy can produce electricity. It can also produce renewable hydrogen, renewable diesel, or ammonia, which could be converted into fertilizer. So it's a zero emission fertilizer potential. And then, as I say, all of that has been summarized along with other baseline research into the baseline document. This is a briefer document. It's easier to read through. From that document, we've established some preliminary goals, and those preliminary goals, we can then project emissions reductions associated with those. Each sector has a couple pages worth of summary of some of the findings, and those draft goals, which again are the ones that are up on the wall today or available through a link for those that are online. From those, these preliminary starter goals, we project that we could reduce emissions countywide by 25% by 2030. And the draft goal that we're putting out there is a goal to reduce emissions by 25% by 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, 20 years later. This plan would not look towards actions beyond 2030, just because it's very difficult to anticipate what's an appropriate action in 2040, right? So many things will change. So usually you want to do about a 5 to 10 year plan. So any questions at all? And I'll put this up. For those of you that are interested, if you're online, the preliminary strategic goal, there are feedback documents. They're Google documents. They're exactly like what's up on the walls here. You can click on that link and you'll see on the upper right-hand side of that document, you just want to click on editing. That'll allow you to write your thoughts or comments in there. If you haven't already, there's also a survey that we'd love your impact on or input on. The online survey link is the second one down. And as I say, we're having a collaborative planning team. If you're interested, there's an opportunity to sign up for that. So there's a few links there. Okay. Yes, sir. Well, the goal doesn't necessarily factor it in. It's a suggested goal. Oh. Would you mind repeating?
How do the carbon neutrality projections factor in the municipal utility providers within Kane County?
So when I'm not sure I'm understanding what you mean by factoring in, but these as goals would be a vision. So it would be a suggestion against which municipal providers could guide themselves. So as they make decisions, they could, if they embrace the goal, consider how, when they, for instance, if they're producing their own, then how might they change their productions? If many municipal will often buy electricity off of the market. So therefore, where might you buy your electricity? How might you contract for that? What sorts of aspects do you put into your contract? So there would be choices that they could navigate by. Yes.
I maybe missed something here. Is the, are you saying that our goal is 25% reduction, or you can get 25% reduction with what you just proposed?
Yes, both. So what we're saying is that the starter, the potential goals that we've put on the wall are a place to start. And so with those potential goals, we can then model what would that look like through 2030. And so the 25% reduction relates to the potential goals that are on the wall. So if we were to say we like those potential goals, then we could achieve a 25% reduction by 2030. If through the planning process, those goals change, then the projected reductions will change.
Okay, so for the projections for reducing farm emissions, will that impact the farmer negatively? Will we be growing less crops, or will there?
We're not really modeling much reduction relative to agriculture.
Okay.
The largest reduction impacts are around our energy consumption and transportation. That's the lion's share of the reduction percentages.
Did you put up the reductions before that you were the goals for each sector of?
We can't hear you.
Oh, the goals for each sector are actually on the walls here that talk about what would be a potential place to start for goals. How they model for reductions, I'm sorry, I did not print out, but it is available. If you scan the QR code or go to that website that's listed, you can find the baseline document. And then there is, for those sections that do have a greenhouse gas emissions, there's a little donut chart that'll show you of these starter goals, kind of what does that relate to in terms of emission changes. So I'm sorry, we should have printed out the little donut chart. I didn't do that. Yes.
What consideration is the county's plan giving to the fact that 3 of its largest cities get almost all, or in the case of Batavia, all of its power from a coal burning power plant? Prairie State.
And I'm sorry, what's the question? I'm sorry.
What consideration is this plan giving to the fact that these long-term contracts that Batavia, St. Charles, and Geneva have with Prairie State don't allow them much room to switch to renewables until those contracts end.
Yeah, so in order to basically, so again, we haven't gotten into the detailed actions for how might we achieve certain goals. But what I can say is that in other communities where that's a consideration, and here we're talking countywide, so we've got different providers all over the place, right? So for countywide, we might have different opportunities based on the conditions for those electric providers, whether they're producing their own electricity, whether they're purchasing once their contract up, so all those factors we don't know. And these are illustrating a potential goal. For actions, what it would ultimately be, usually when it comes to municipal utilities, there's usually a percentage that's built into their agreement where they can self-produce or purchase elsewhere or allow for on-site renewables, for instance. So you'd often end up with a short-term action and a midterm action and a long-term action. And the short-term action is leverage what capacity the agreement allows. Usually it's a few percentage points at least to advance distributed renewable energy, which can be a benefit for good properties that have good solar potential. Midterm is now as you prepare for an agreement that comes up, usually there's a term, a 5-year, 10-year, 15-year term potentially. Wherever that agreement is, then renegotiate to purchase renewables. Long-term might be to explore whether or not the municipal utility wants to self-produce if they're not already, for instance. So, but those detailed actions would come out of then our next step of exploring as we kind of come with preliminary goals and planning team starting to identify how those goals might want to change. Then the next step is let's identify actions.
Just as a follow-up to, thank you for your question. We plan to engage with municipal representatives from each of those communities and get everybody together and discussing about what challenges we have, what solutions might be available to us, and just starting that discussion and getting everyone in the room. Yeah, thank you so much. Do we want to go ahead and give some time for folks to go around to the posters?
Yeah, that'd be great. I'm certainly available for questions and thoughts and so forth, but it would be great to, if you can, it'd be lovely if you could just kind of wander around and see the preliminary goals. We've got Post-it notes and pens. And if you have any thoughts, a goal that you think should change, a goal that you don't like, a goal that you think is missing, or maybe you've got, as you read a goal, you think, oh, that's an interesting goal. Hey, I got an idea. I know Bob or Betty can do this or that. So if you got an idea on an action, just write down anything you want to share with us related to those goals or other goals on your Post-it note and paste it on the goal that you're commenting towards, if you can, so that we know how it associates. The other thing you can do is you'll see each goal has a number. So you could write the number and then your comment. Okay, that way we can track. But that's what we'd like to make sure we allow for. And then I can be here and answer questions. But yeah. Yes, thank you very much. All of these goals are available online. That first link up there, the Google Drive, that's, if you click on that, each one of these boards is a Google document, exactly as they're shown. We can put this on the public-facing web page, and we could also collect email. It will be, yeah, it will be. There's a our public-facing page for the Kane County Climate Action. We will put this slideshow on there, and we'll also provide links that say, hey, if you want to click on the Google documents, you can do that. So it's not there right now, but it will be tonight. You bet.
I'm sure it is.
Sure.
Thank you. I have a question that's a little broader than Kane County. What's the status of carbon sequestration in terms of actual work and planning?
So the status in terms of carbon sequestration. So that's a very broad topic. Carbon sequestration comes about either through natural systems like trees and grasses and so forth, or mechanical systems, mechanical means. Exactly. Yeah. We can pull carbon and produce energy out of it, that sort of thing. For the mechanical system, then the other third is also storage. So capturing carbon and storing it in the ground. So there's a lot of research going on in that, groups working on that. I don't know that the industry is not super mature. The most mature part of the industry is capturing carbon from like power plants and then storing it. Usually is what they do is they capture the carbon and then they store it in an underground, an old salt mine or something like that. So you bet.
Yeah. You too. What's that about? Sorry. I think we don't. Oh, no.
I think I'm. How are you, sir? There's some good questions. Yeah, right.
Hello. Yes. I was.
Went over the music gentleman next to that. Race, so yeah, it's not tense. Tense as hell. Oh my God, isn't that something? I see the Campton Hills race. I think so too.
Good question.
On the phone, I'm right, we're talking some climate stuff.
It looks like it smokes, right? Yes, it's good.
So you give it to her and then that's bigger than that. Alrighty, guys. Good to see you. What are you doing here? I took a video too.
Great effort.
I saw you speak out. You came along.
Thanks.
No, I definitely want to get.
Nice to meet you.
Yes.
Long
Yeah,
time
I
no
was
see.
looking around, I thought, yeah.
Up here. Bill Kettenberg.
Okay. Okay. Up in
My daughter and
other counties in Wisconsin. Okay. We're really doing very well. That's great. Chris, second big thing, right? Yeah, but it's their initial. Okay, yeah. Okay. Okay, all right. Yeah, and I don't know. You know, she got so. Yeah. You're, yeah. Wow. You know. Yeah, oh, that. So do you want to?
If you'd like a sandwich, please help yourself. There's still several left.
Yeah.